Hello, everybody. This lecture is about AAC competence, which is important when we think about determining our client's level of functioning and we begin decision making. So how exactly do we determine the level of functioning for our AAC users? It can get complicated because, as we know, in verbal children, we can use standardized tests, we can look at developmental norms, and we can apply that knowledge of how communication skills typically develop, and then we can determine an approximate age level or point of development. These tools are used to provide a guideline when we're selecting objectives for therapy, and they provide a direction for us clinicians when we're trying to achieve age-appropriate or those functional communication skills. But what happens when a child is nonverbal and uses AAC to communicate? What are we going to use to help us determine those levels of functioning? That brings us to communicative competence. So there are 4 areas of communicative competence that can be used as a guideline for determining levels of functioning. Janice Light in 1989 outlined 4 foundational AAC competencies that lead to independent communication. So the 4 areas are up here. They are linguistic competence. So that's thinking about whether or not our users understand the symbols. Are they using the symbols appropriately to convey messages? Then there's operational, so our users need to know how to operate their AAC system, whether that's flipping through a picture book and locating icons, or whether that is utilizing a high-tech AAC device. The other area is the social competence, so that's pragmatically connecting with people around the users, commenting, questioning, or sometimes having full-blown conversations utilizing the device. And then lastly, strategic. So that's when our users are fixing their communication breakdowns. So when the conversation is not flowing the way that they would like, can the user identify and recognize the breakdown? What are their strategies to fix it? So using these different areas helps us figure out where an AAC user is functioning. So the first area that we'll explore a little bit more in depth is linguistic competence. So this includes those knowledge and skills associated with someone's ability to utilize the linguistic code of their system. For AAC users, this linguistic competence is really twofold because they have to master the native spoken language of the listeners and people around them, as well as the linguistic code on their system. So think accessing those symbols, that unique code, and also the communication partners need to learn the AAC system. So they're kind of threaded through here with the linguistic competence area. So next, operational competence. To explore this a bit more, users need to be able to operate their system efficiently. So they need the technical skills in order to power the device on and off, control the volume, navigate from page to page. And this is where we think back to those alternative access modalities as well. That's part of operational competence. So it's a person's physical limitations, how they're able to overcome that, and the motor demands associated. There's also this idea of accelerating the rate of communication. So when somebody is determined to have mastered this area, they are competent in operations, they have gotten to a point where their communication is flowing at an accelerated rate. So they're able to access symbols very quickly. But the study up here by Siegel and Parnes in 1988 concluded that when the cognitive load on our users is too great, accelerating their communication rate and the way that they access the symbols can be negatively impacted. So when we're working towards mastery in this area, we may have to look at who the facilitators or communication partners are, and provide some training. So looking at the facilitators at the school versus maybe in camp, at home versus a support group. How do we teach how to protect and repair the device? How do we modify the system to make it easier, or get to that accelerated rate of communication, as far as the layout and adding icons and removing icons? That's all part of operational competence. Now, social competence is the next area that we'll discuss. So that's really the pragmatics. So when an AAC user has the knowledge, judgment, and skills during communication or social interactions. In your article, you'll see that this is the awareness of when to speak and when not to speak, and what to talk about with whom. So when someone is initiating conversation or maintaining conversation, terminating conversation, that's all falling under the umbrella of social competence. And we can train in a variety of functions. So this could be asking questions, rejecting, commenting, etc. Okay, so when users are in the position where they're experiencing communication breakdown, we are looking at the strategic competence. So this last area, when a user is able to repair and resolve, ask for help, we are working towards mastery here. So I have some examples of different strategies that help our users get to strategic competence. When young children are utilizing picture-based systems, they might utilize the phrase, "please guess." So this really helps bypass any vocabulary restrictions. So if they don't have the vocab word that they need, or they're trying to solicit the communication partner's participation in co-constructing the meaning. We also see that there are strategies to compensate for a slow speaking rate, and that could be by, and this is more so used by aphasic adults, but using telegraphic utterances, or partner prediction. So what we're finding is that strategic competence can be very helpful in very novel situations where the other areas of competency might be unique or unexpected. So that's linguistic, operational, interpersonal demands. Those are all unique and unexpected. So having strategic competence and strategies there can really help interactions flow a lot easier. So just to go back, we mentioned earlier, it's not always possible to administer standardized tests to people who use AAC, right? So, and additionally, we don't always have the developmental norms for speech, for speech and language for AAC users, because their receptive language is based on both verbal and symbolic language. And then their expressive language is primarily symbol-based. So we really need to define these levels. So we went through what the competence looks like. Now we're going to talk about the different levels, and we'll string all of it together. So we have 5 levels of functioning in AAC users. So level 1 is the emergent communicator. Level 2 is a wants and needs communicator. Level 3 is a context cue communicator. Level 4 is a transitional communicator. And lastly, we have our independent communicators. So you'll see that there are some resources that thread together these different levels of functioning and some goals. That's from Toby Dynavox. And we also have the classification system for individuals with aphasia, and that was developed by Garrett and Bugelman. So just for your review as we talk through these different levels. Okay, so first, level 1, emerging communicator. These users primarily rely on non-symbolic communication. So they're not yet using those symbols, those pictures on their system. Okay, they're primarily using gestures, facial expressions. They may not understand yet the power and purpose of communication. They may not understand the symbolic communication, which is why they are primarily using non-symbolic communication. They may have delayed or impaired language precursors, so that's that joint attention, imitation, and turn taking. And here we see none to minimal use of language for social communication. Now, with a level 2, a wants and needs communicator, we're seeing that their vocabulary consists of nouns and verbs. They're beginning to use symbols to make choices and meaningful requests of objects or actions. So they typically do not combine symbols to make a phrase or a sentence. And if they do, it's really kind of basic and predictable. It's want Oreo or want goldfish, so that desired object or action. So they typically don't use symbols to interact socially with others. This is really solely for wants and needs. And at this point, they typically do not have strategic competency skills, and they have limited operational skills. So they're really relying on their communication partner for basic system operation, finding and selecting desired symbols. Okay, next, a little bit about our level 3 or context cue communicator. This is kind of split into beginner and then a bit more advanced. So the beginning of this stage, a beginner, is an AAC user that's relying heavily on context or cues and supports from communication partners. So in the linguistic skill area, their vocabulary is including more of a variety of nouns and verbs. And we're beginning to observe some combinations of symbols that form, these short utterances. And we start to observe some basic pronouns such as I and you. I like this. Your turn. As far as the social competency, we are beginning to see greetings and farewells and very routine comments such as, again, I like this, wow, yuck. Operational skills are beginning to develop here in the very early stages. So a user might be learning to turn the device on and off, adjust the volume on their own, and they're slowly increasing their efficiency with navigating and locating symbols. But again, this is just at the beginning. Now we start to see strategic skills emerging with a context cue communicator. So they are starting to recognize their own communication breakdown. And when they do, some strategies might be they're repeating a message when they don't get a response from their communication partner. Now with the level 4 or context cue communicator, so this is kind of towards the latter end of this level 4. This user is still relying on context and cues, but we're seeing much more increased confidence and skill from this level 3. So still context cue, but a bit more advanced here. So this user is using their system for a variety of purposes, questions, comments, etc. They're combining symbols for a variety of utterances. These are at varying lengths. We're starting to see grammatical sentences, so certainly we have pronouns in there. They are accurately and appropriately answering questions. And of course, we still see that they need support here. But again, the variety of purposes, we're seeing questions now. They are asking questions with their system. They are commenting and participating in basic structured conversation here. And now we're starting to see a bit more recognition of communication breakdown, and they're applying some simple repair strategies. So a bit more than here. This is the beginning stages. They may or may not be recognizing communication breakdown with the strategic skills. Here, it's certainly more occasional. So that's the difference between a level 3 and a level 4. Now, a level 5 is a transitional communicator. So there is increased independence with their skills. They are occasionally relying on cues and context, especially when they're communicating with less familiar communication partners. But we're certainly seeing more independence. We're seeing these users can navigate to a variety of vocabulary and their symbols that might be located on different pages, folders. They're getting more proficient with the basic operations, so now they don't need assistance with, say, turning the device on and off, adjusting the volume, perhaps programming their own device. We're seeing them create novel utterances with varied structure and complexity. They are able to answer a variety of questions from varied communication partners, which is great. It's not just the familiar communication partners, but now they are able to begin answering questions with unfamiliar communication partners. They are becoming more competent in social interactions with familiar partners because their conversational skills are starting to improve. And lastly, they are repairing communication breakdown with strategies that are appropriate to the situation. Okay, so that's the big thing here. They are consistently repairing communication breakdown. They are certainly more competent and confident in social interactions, but they're not quite independent yet. That's why they are level 5. They still are occasionally relying on cues and context. And with a level 6 communicator, they are independent and proficient across all areas of those competencies and in a variety of environments. And we have here just as much as individual abilities will allow. So these different levels that we just went through provide a more structured path towards that independent, proficient use of AAC. Those are kind of our AAC norms that we can follow as a guide. They provide the benchmark skills and they allow for progress monitoring in those 4 different areas. Alternative measure and assessment of individuals who are difficult to evaluate using the standard measures. That's really the key piece here. And this really helps assist us with goal selection because it provides kind of a hierarchy of skills. So we start with basic operations when it comes to that operational competency, and we're working towards more proficient. Or when we think about the strategic areas of competency, we might start with the very basic communication repair, like repeating a sentence again, and then we can become a lot more advanced with letting somebody know that you need just a moment, so on and so forth. So the key takeaways here is that when determining levels of functioning or the stages of development for AAC, this is really going to be based on tracking their path towards communicative competence, which we know is in those 4 different areas. Communicative competence using AAC is different than competencies needed for individuals who use speech as a primary method of communication, so that's important. And ultimately, having these levels to assign to an individual allows for SLPs to better assess and track progress and develop goals and have conversations with our clients and with their family members. And it leads to a more well-rounded and proficient communicator. So now we're going to take a concept that we discussed before, and that's the core vocabulary, and we're going to apply it to communicative competence. So we know that we have these 4 areas of communicative competence. Again, it's operational, linguistic, social, and strategic. And these were outlined by Janice Light in 1989, and you have that article there. You may be asking yourself at this point how to select vocabulary. What does goals and treatment look like, depending on the level that a particular person is functioning at. So as always, we want to incorporate vocabulary that's powerful, flexible, and functional. If we look at the different areas of communicative competence and what is most important to keep in mind, then we can look at the core vocabulary. So operational, again, that's locating and navigating to icons. With linguistic, that's developing those language skills with function and development in mind. So thinking back to when we discussed syntax and semantics, that all needs to be considered when we're choosing vocabulary. Now with social, we want to think of our users joining into play and commenting and conversational skills. I highlighted here, this is where fringe vocabulary will be important. And then strategic, asking for help. So fixing communication breakdowns, what vocabulary do we need there? For an emerging communicator, we must remember that the users are not yet using symbolic communication to communicate, or perhaps they're just in the very early stages. With a wants and needs communicator, they're using symbolic language on a very basic level, but they're just primarily communicating their wants and needs. Now for a context cue communicator, these individuals are ready to learn language. So they are combining symbols to create sentences, answer questions, but remember, they're still relying on context and cues to communicate. Now with a transitional communicator, they are gaining more complex language and social skills, but we have to continue to provide additional opportunities for them to advance, establish future goals, etc. And with an independent communicator, again, they are independent, but they may just need support to continue establishing their own goals and advancing, similar to that transitional communicator. Okay, so when we're thinking about vocabulary for the different levels, start with emerging. Here, it's definitely okay to start with fringe vocabulary. So you might think that you would use goldfish cracker or Oreo, kind of the favorite snacks, and they're very motivating, highly desired objects. Why? Because we have to get these users to buy into symbolic communication. With a wants and needs communicator, we can graduate and transition from that goldfish cracker Oreo to now something that is more of a core word, like snack or food or eat. So this is where we really start incorporating functional core words into requests. Here are some other examples you'll see. So different actions with, of course, that relate to wants and needs, games or playtime. So go, stop, help, more, all done. Concepts such as in and out, when you think about playing. And then social, hi, goodbye. Okay, so with a context cue communicator, we have a good foundation here. Individuals can request, so we begin to think about a variety of different communication functions. So not only requesting, but we'll see commenting, protesting and rejecting. We want to give these users an opportunity to describe, answer, and ask questions. And you'll see there's a reference list by G. Van Tantenhove with some core words for different communication functions to give you some food for thought. So we want to make sure that we develop goals across all 4 competency areas. We want to refer to core word lists for guidance on choosing the vocabulary. We want to spend time developing receptive and expressive vocabulary and work towards, building our sentences and building that vocabulary. We want to look at social goals because these are crucial in terms of making connections with other people. So just thinking about developing the user's play skills or social phrases, age-appropriate comments, or just expressing oneself when interacting with someone, such as I like this is fun, this is boring. And of course, the vocabulary to build relationships and social closeness. But of course, this is not without challenges. So the picture representation is much more difficult with core words. So if you think about how easy it is to find a picture to represent Oreo or goldfish, of course, we could just take a photo of a goldfish cracker or an Oreo. That's easy, whereas a core word such as on or in is much harder to represent. So that's why we tend to see clinicians, teachers, parents, people just kind of going more towards fringe words and steering away from core words, which is something we just have to be mindful not to do. And of course, that's because they think it's easier to use specific nouns for requests, but we know that's not always the case. There's a lot more carryover when we use the core words. Snack can be used for many different snacks, whereas that goldfish icon is going to be only used for goldfish. Many people also buy into the myth that core words are not as motivating as fringe words to make these specific requests. So the picture of an Oreo is going to be a lot more motivating than just the word snack. But of course, that is just a myth. The symbol, the icon for snack is going to get a user many different snack options. And specific requests can be made using either pronouns or descriptors. So we don't need those fringe words in order to make a specific request. We are able to make specific requests using this, that, fast, slow, etc. But again, to reiterate, there is a balance between core and fringe vocabulary. Both are very important. We've gone through why core vocabulary is very important, but we know that fringe is important when it comes to a person's personality, their academics, or their specific interests. So the balance is certainly important. Now, I want you guys to review the literature that I posted on the communicative competencies and some of the research out there. And I would like you to post in the discussion forum any thoughts, comments, questions that you have about the 4 areas, or even about how to apply them in the vocabulary. Okay, so here are the key takeaways again, and we will speak again soon.